So we've got our background made, and now we've got to make up some other elements. If we just remind ourselves with our reference here what we've got to do, we've got this raise effect that kind of wipes around our hero there. We've got this glow edge, which once again wipes out to reveal some live action in the background. So several elements that we've got to make, and then we're going to tackle the sort of distressed edges right at the very end. Now the reason that we're doing it like this as elements is because we're going to have to do a lot of syncing in time with different things. For that we really need the timeline. So although we're going to be using action to build some of these elements, we're not going to be doing the final composite inside of action. We've got our background plate here. We've got that's our live action, and we've just extracted a static frame from this. And once again, to save you watching me draw them out, I've drawn them out previously. And we're ready to kind of start with this. So first thing, we want to get that sort of edge reveal for the rays working. So once again, I'm going to use the modular key for this. I could use some desktop tools, but I want to do a few other things, and I want to do it all in one hit, as it were. So we're going to go into our modular key, and that's going to be our result there. We're just going to reset this quickly to here. So here we've got our basically our elements in, and once again we're going to take make a selection out of these. We're just going to delete all these straight away. And now really what I want to do in this is I want to find an edge. So I'm going to get my edge detect node out into there for a moment and have a quick look. Okay, we're going to use a double edge on this just to give it a little bit more width. Coming back out here, we want to slightly blur that, so I'm going to take out a blur node, and we're just going to hook this in as well. Once again, look at this, and then maybe just give this something, just take the edge off, maybe something like 1, something like that. That's pretty good. Once again, really nice. I'm just kind of using the modular keyer really as sort of like a bit of a playground. We're just going to render out one frame of that onto our desktop. So here we have our edge. Now the next thing we want to do on this is we want to do that kind of animated reveal. So I want to make a version of this that kind of wipes on. Now I've worked out some times earlier, and this actual raise reveal is going to be about 50 frames in length or thereabouts. So a couple of things I need to do. I actually don't want the reveal to go all the way around. We want it to kind of stop. Kind of look on this one, we'll kind of stop about around about his stomach point, something like that. So I really need to sort of do a version which is painted out. So come into paint, we're going to get just a black brush here. We're just going to go to our canvas, going to set this to something like constant for a moment, and I'm just going to paint out the areas that I don't really initially need. So like I said, we're going to have something up to around about his midriff, something like that. I'm just going to paint this out. We don't really want that. Once we're going to exit, we're going to get the result of that on our desktop. Now, this is the one that we want to use to do our animation. So once again, straight back into the paint module. Once again, we're just going to reset that for a second. I really want to do sort of like a wipe on. Now, I want to completely wipe this off. So I'm actually going to do this in reverse. And I'm going to use a new desktop tool to kind of sort that out. First off, this wants to be around about 50 frames in length here. We're going to go into our auto paint, into our user, and once again get a black brush on this one, set this to constant, and I'm just really going to very quickly just sort of paint fairly briskly around the edge of this as carefully as I can while I'm talking. Not very good at doing two things at once, but you're going to get the idea of where we're going with this. And once again, I've got some pre-made elements that we can use right at the end for the final. So just coming down to there and complete. We're just going to tap down there. And we see it's remembered our strokes. This is going to now basically animate over those 50 frames, and we're just going to process that out really quickly. When that's done, we're going to be back on the desktop. And as you can see here, we've got this current version now is the one that is basically has our animation. Now, obviously, we want this to go the other way. We want this to kind of wipe on for our raise effect when we get there. So like I said, we're always expanding on these flame effects. If we go into our flame effects 2, which is for this particular reset extension, we've got a time warp tool, and we've got things like motion blur, motion analysis, matchbox, and various other bits and pieces that we've been looking at. Time warp, and just select that to front and take that into here. You can see that we've got obviously a time warp tool now sitting on the desktop. This is kind of nice. There's been some nice improvements on this. We can put motion blur on, and the algorithms all being completely rewritten, which is pretty good. The nice thing is that the timing and the speed have been completely split out, so we can come into here now, just hit reverse, and you can see that that's actually now going to reverse that footage really quickly. And we're just going to reprocess that back out of the desktop. So we've got our raise reveal heading in the right direction. Right, so the next thing we really want to do is to start actually making that ray effect. I'm actually going to do that in action with one of our lighting tools as well. So here we are in action. We just loaded on our reveal as a matte to a black front that we've loaded in. We just added that into the scene. We're just currently just looking at the matte view so we can see that we've actually got that animation there as it is at the moment. Now what we're actually going to do here is we're going to put a light in the scene. So if we're going to find a light, and we're going to drop that in, and we're also going to attach a raise object to that as well. Now we're going to need to switch to our result view, which means it's going to go black just for a second, and also we're just going to swap to a 3-up view so we can actually kind of see where we're positioning our light in respect to everything else. Now we want our matte here to basically cut a hole through this black layer. So if we just take our light for a second, and we're just going to move that back in Z space from over there, and we're also going to a new small feature, but we're just going to actually lock the pivot point off, so we've got kind of control on this as well. Now at the moment we're sort of cutting out a black shape with our matte, so we want to actually go into our media list here, and we just want to invert our matte here, so actually just cutting a hole through that black, and that's going to allow the rays to kind of shine through. So a couple of things here. We're just going to do some really quick simple animation. We're just going to kind of position our light fairly well back, and we're just going to bring our raise object fairly well to the beginning, and we just want to sort of position it so we can actually see a majority of our kind of shape. We're really going to have to push up the intensity to sort of see some things, so we're going to really sort of over crank that a little bit, and we're also going to add in some colour, and this is where, remember, it needs to be that sort of nice overblown sort of golden look, and we can kind of play with that a little bit when we comp this back in. So that's pretty good. And obviously you can see now that our reveal is kind of wiping through, so really nice having these volumetric lights. We can actually just kind of orbit our camera on this one for a moment. You can see we've got that proper volumetric rays coming through that surface, which is really kind of quite nice to have. Right, so we want to add a little bit of movement to this as well. We also want to make this a little bit more softer. So if we go back into our media list for a moment, and we're just going to sort of blur our matte, just so we sort of take the edge of that off of that, make it that really nice kind of overblown sort of look coming through the rays there. The last thing we really want to do is add a little bit of movement into this, make it a little bit more dynamic. So once again, if we just add a little bit of animation, so maybe if we just have our lights finishing at frame 60, I've gone 10 frames over just to give us a little bit of extra movement for when we can composite this in the timeline. But if we just sort of end up with our light around about there, and then if we kind of go back to the beginning, something like this, and maybe we just move our light just a bit over that side, and then we can kind of see how that's kind of nice. We just got a little bit of movement going there. So we're just going to quickly process that out. So back in the desktop, we can see the result of our render with our rays, looking really kind of nice. Last thing we need to do is sort of generate this kind of reveal matte with the hot edge to finally show the background through. So we're going to go back into action, do that in there. We're just going to load in our original matte, and also just a white background for a second. We're just going to select both of these. I'm just going to turn the matte off for a second. Right, let's split our view up to 2 again. We're just going to add these both into our scene. I'm just going to drop that behind there for a moment. And we need to sort of animate some kind of key on this. Make the length of our comp around about 25 frames. And initially we're going to start drawing a matte on this particular layer. So if we just go into our keyer for a second, and we're just going to load in a default shape on here for a moment. And the whole idea about this is that we're just going to really sort of make a matte that's going to kind of cover around about half of the character, so something around about there would be good. I'm just going to change that to kind of black. Now we want to sort of have an angle. We're going to make 2 of these. We're actually going to duplicate these out. So we're going to add an extra point just at the top of his head, just there for a second. We can sort that out. We're going to select that one, and we're just going to move this just literally over to the edge of frame, something like, actually going to take both of those now. Just going to move it something like over there just for a second. This we really need to make a little bit straighter, so something like that. And once again, we just need to kind of move both of these. Let's just take those on the scale there, just so we can just stretch that out to kind of stretch that out. So he's just got like a nice angle coming from the corner of the frame into his head. We're just going to tidy this point up as well, so we can just use these tools. Actually really useful when you're just trying to make very sort of like small precise movements, and we can also look at that in context of what we've got back in our comp. So we're going to just position that something roughly around about there. That's going to be fine. Returning back out, obviously we've got this big white expanse here. Now a new feature they put in the extension was the ability, we want to actually make another one of these to sort of animate the other way. It will become clear in just a second. Nice new feature, we've got these clone and paste options now. So we can actually take this, we can actually clone the media and the effects, because I actually want the duplicate of this. Now we're just going to once again add this into our scene just for a second. So we've actually got a duplicate of it, and this particular one we're just going to go and change that matte. So coming back into our GMask for a second, once again using that positioning tool there, we're just going to select this point here, and we're just going to move it all the way to that corner now. And we're just going to kind of flip that matte. So actually what we've got now is out of the two halves, we've made up the character again. Now the whole idea of that, this is at over 25 frames. We're just going to do an animation to move these out. We're just going to set a keyframe at the beginning there, move to the end, and we're just going to literally sort of pan this out to one side, just so it literally completely wipes out the frame. We're going to do the same with the left hand side. We're going to set a keyframe at the beginning, and over the course of this we're just going to move this one so it does the opposite. So what actually we're going to have with the combination of these two is we're just going to have this kind of like splitting matte that kind of wipes through the frame. Once again, process this back out to desktop, and then we can make the hot edge. So here back in the desktop you can see we've got our white reveal. We're just going to run this through once again the edge detect on the flame effect. So we're just going to take this into edge detect. I'm just going to take this to front, because basically what we want, I'm just going to make this as a double edge once again. What we actually want on this is actually kind of like a hot edge reveal. So once again, quickly processing that through. Back to desktop, we've now got the result of this as our split, and we're going to use an old favourite. We're going to come into our effects, and we're going to choose optics, just to really kind of glow that completely out. So let's reduce the noise on this for a second, and we also want to kind of just reduce the intensity as well. Just going to bring that up to something like this. Just going to reduce the size. We just want to have like a nice kind of like glowing hot edge. Maybe just something like would be pretty good, and process that through. So we've got that kind of like expanding edge now that's going to match our matte. And pretty much now we've got all the elements that we need to start building this directly into the timeline. So back here on the desktop, we've tidied some things up, and we just started the basis of our comp here. We've got basically our football layer, our static frame, as you can see here, and our layer below we just dropped our background in as well, just to start the comp. So first thing we need to do is to kind of come in here and use our matte to cut through. So we're just going to add an axis effect onto this. I'm just going to load this matte in here, and you can see straight away we've cut through. A couple of things we want to do in here before we leave this. We want to sort of have a shadow on as well. So we just come into our shadow properties. I'm just going to really sort of kind of quickly just recenter the pivot points for this. We want kind of like a nice sort of big shadow on this, something like this. Maybe just proportionally just stretch that out. It's going to kind of add some softness in as well, and also just kind of add a little bit of that sort of background colour into it, something around about that, just to kind of blend it in. We also want to colour correct our front down, and we can do that once again inside this module. If we go into our keyer, we can utilise a colour correct front, and once again if we knock the saturation down to 0, just put a little bit of a tint in, maybe something like this, and just push a little bit of contrast up. And coming out of this, coming back into our axis effect, you can see it kind of blends in quite nicely. The next things that we really want to do at this stage is then start to sort out where our reveals and things are going to be happening, and we've got a rough idea of where those are. And before that, we're going to be dropping our rays in as well on a brand new layer. So I'm going to take this one, edit this down. Look at this, put an axis effect on again. We're going to put some kind of blending on this to make it really sort of burn through. So something like a simple add. That kind of works really nicely. So we've got our animation sort of tearing through, and our rays coming up, And now the next thing we want to do is really sort of start to sync up some of those reveals. So at this point, we really want to use a reveal mat to sort of start cutting through to a layer below. So we're going to come down to our layer here for a moment. This is our background layer, and this is the layer we're going to apply our mat to. Now, we do this once again through the axis effect, and we're going to come in here. We're going to load that reveal mat up for a second. Now, at the moment, we're not going to see anything because obviously there's no media below this, but we do need to sync that mat up. So if we come into our mat container for a second, we can literally just pick this up and we can just drop this in the correct place. And coming back out here, you can see that we've got a mat revealing. Now the mat is initially the wrong way around, so we're going to go straight back into this, and we're just going to invert our mat inside the axes. So now we've got kind of like a black shape cutting through this. We need something to obviously to reveal through to. So we're going to make a new layer below, and initially we're just going to drop in our static frame. So back in our record timeline, we're just going to add some ins and outs at just this point, and we're just going to record down this particular layer. So now we've got our sort of like live action background sort of kind of being revealed, except this is a static and it's going to run out here. So once again, at this point, we can come to here, we can take our actual live action sequence and we can kind of edit that in. And now what we've got is we've got our reveal happening, and we can actually get rid of this background copy somewhere around about here. If we just kind of make a cut and get rid of this, now we've got our reveal working and revealing our football player. Obviously, going up a layer, we can see our rays, also kind of our football player. Now the rays run out obviously at this point, so we really want to get rid of our static football player there as well. So once again, we can just sort of cut that and get away, and we really want to get rid of those rays in a kind of a nice way. So we're just going to add very quickly a couple of dissolves through, and now we've sort of got the basis of what's happening here. We've got our rays fading off, we've got our football player fading off, revealing the live action background below, going into our live action sequence. So that's all kind of working quite nicely. We've got a couple of other things that we sort of want to drop in at this point, and this is going to be really our sort of like our hot edge reveal, as it were. So I'd like that to happen underneath the ray. So once again, we can make a new layer underneath, and we can just grab that particular sequence, edit that in. Now we've got our sort of burning edge, and this one we're going to add yet another axis, come in fairly quickly and just add like something like a screen. Coming back to this, and you can see that now we've got all those things kind of working nicely together. We've got our rays, we've got our hot edge reveal that's going through to the background, and a live action. Now there's actually a bit of a kind of a kick here. We actually don't really want this to go to full color, and we would really like live action, our sort of like kind of background, to inherit some of that original tint. So what's really nice about this is that we can start adding things like soft effects to a gap. So here we've got an empty layer. This is going to affect everything below, and we're just going to come in very quickly and just put a color correct into that particular layer, and look at it in our color correct tools here, and just literally knock some of the saturation out. This is going to affect everything that's underneath this. At the same time, just put a little bit of a sort of kind of a tint in, just to sort of mimic, probably don't really need much, probably just something like this, just to mimic the feel of what we're coming through to. We don't want it to be totally 100% colour. And once again, this is just going to nicely sort of interact with these other things here, maintain that sort of colour. So it's all kind of working really well. On the original, the last thing that we sort of really had was sort of like quite a heavy vignette around this. Now, there has some sort of like distressing edges. If we look back at our original here for a second, sort of like some distressed edges and bits and pieces like that going on. What we've done on this is very quickly just made up from a white plate. We've run it through damage. We put a vignette on, and we've just put that through a color correct. And what we're going to do here is once again just add ourselves in a new layer. I'm just going to mark some ins and outs for this particular layer here. So I'm going to do something like this just to mark everything, and we're just going to literally insert edit that over the top of everything. And once again, this particular case, putting through an axis and just adding something like a multiply on this, and maybe just sort of filtering this back, something like this, or about 20%, just to literally give it that nice kind of vignette with some marks around and everything. The last thing, the original was kind of a little bit more dynamic at the beginning. We had this sort of like zoom out as the rays revealed, and then went through to sort of like the locked off plate. And once again, what's nice about this is that we can come back to our original that we're working on here, and once again on an empty layer we can apply an axis effect, to which we're going to put through kind of like a zoom on this. So if we go along our timeline a little bit to roughly where the reveal finishes, so something around about, just going to nudge on a couple of frames there, something around about there. We'll just put auto key, and we're just going to set a keyframe for our zoom, and at the beginning we're going to make this around about 110%, just so it's like zooming up. And you can see now that we're going to actually, that axis effect is going to affect everything that is underneath it. So all that compositing, all the animation that we've done with the rays, all kind of being affected by the axes. And that's pretty much our final build. Now, we're not really going to kind of render this through right now, but we actually do have one that's sort of pre-built with all our effects on, everything sort of rendered through. And if we look at our final result on this, this is it. So everything's sort of really working quite nicely. We've got our sort of like animation zoom down. We've got our rays writing through, hot edge reveal through to our background with the color correct on a live action. So a really nice example of sort of the combination between using the modular key and desktop tools in action to create these effects, and then sort of having to do quite complicated syncing up to get all those elements to work, something that you wouldn't really initially go through and do in action because of all the timeline issues and syncing and things like that. However, in our final example, we're going to do everything inside of action to build that kind of big picture wall that we saw at the beginning. So we're going to be doing that right next.